Hi, and welcome to Global Professionals in Portugal. My name is Cordelia, and today's guest, Amelie, is an English teacher, and she's going to share with us her journey working in Portugal. Amelie, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Cordelia.
So, can you tell me what brought you to Portugal and how did you end up working here?
So mine really is a journey. I actually left the United States in 2005 and I moved to Nepal at the request of a Tibetan Buddhist leader to help them with their English program and also with development and fundraising, because that was my background when I lived in the United States. I ended up staying in Nepal for 5 years. During that time, I realized that I didn't really want to return to the United States in the role that I had been in. And I really found that I enjoyed teaching, although I wasn't qualified. So I worked to get qualified. I first got my certification as a teacher of English to students of foreign languages. Then I got a job at a university in Korea. So I moved to Korea. And I was in Korea from 2010 to 2022.
Oh, wow.
Korea has mandatory retirement for educators at the age of 65. And I knew this was fast approaching for me. And so I started looking at what else I could do. Now, while I was in Korea, I furthered my continuing education and got a diploma from University College in London. Because I think if you're going to say you are a linguist and a teacher, you need those
Sure,
qualifications in
yeah.
today's age. You know, a lot of people got into teaching because they were English speakers in a foreign country. It takes a little bit more than that. So I spent a lot of time in continuing education, which I think is important for no matter what field you're in. So anyway, I was looking at 65 thinking, what am I going to do now? Where am I going to go now? And I became a language assessor. So while I was working at the university, I was also working for the British Council doing IELTS testing, which
Mhm.
many foreigners, especially here in Europe, know about. It's a language test if you want to get a job in an English speaking corporation, if you want to go to an English speaking school and English is not your first language. So I started working for IELTS, British Council, and I did that for a couple of years. And then at the same time, trying to figure out where I'm going to go. And I carry a US passport, which is a good passport to carry because it's accepted many places. So I started looking at countries where I would like to live, where I could afford to live,
Mhm.
that would take my passport, where I
Right.
could get a visa. So you have to kind of put all these things together. And France was my first choice because my oldest sister lives in France. I have nieces and nephews in France. I grew up speaking French. So I could get a visa to live and work in France, but I
Okay.
didn't like the work visa that I could get. And I think that's really important to figure out if you are thinking about going to another country. Not just, can I get a visa there, but does that visa work for me personally? And the French visa didn't personally work for me. So I'm looking at other countries. I'm looking at South America, Ecuador, Panama,
Mhm.
thinking about weather, money. I looked at Eastern Europe countries, Albania, Greece. I knew that I didn't want to go to another country that didn't use the Roman alphabet. So
Right.
Greece was out.
Okay.
So pre-COVID, while I was living in Korea, I did couch surfing, where you host someone from another country to stay at your house for a night or two to learn about where you live. And I hosted a woman from Portugal who is also a teacher, who is also around my age. And so I wrote her and I said, "Hey, I'm looking for a country to go live in, and I might come visit Portugal." And she said, "Well, I have a spare bedroom. I'm willing to rent it to you." So I was like, "Portugal, here I come." So that was how I ended up in Portugal, having looked at the D7 visa carefully, realizing that it would work for me. I applied for my D7 not based on work. This was pre D8 visa. And so it was based on my savings, my pension, but allowed me to work. I now work as an international language assessor of English for a US company called Language Testing International, and I work online. And I can work anywhere where there's internet, and I can open my computer, log into my company, and listen to English learners, English speakers, and assess their proficiency in English. So that's what I do, and that's how I'm here.
Wow, what a journey. So you lived in Nepal, South Korea, and now Portugal.
And ages ago, I lived in France
Okay.
with my another sister who had a business in Paris. So I've also lived there. So I've had a bit of expat experience in various countries.
Okay. So why did you feel like you just didn't want to go live in the US? Without, I don't want to get too deep into politics and stuff, but just in general, it sounds like even, without that, you really were happy the expat life was for you.
Um, it's a little bit of two things. First of all, what brought me to Nepal, I got into into trekking.
Okay.
And in the early 2000, I think it was 2000, 2001, I did a trek to Everest Base Camp. At the time, I was living in Houston. I had a two-bedroom condominium in the right part of town. I had a very good job in the Texas Medical Center, and I would drive to work like this.
Mm.
I went to Nepal. I went on this trek, and this was really before Nepal was on a lot of people's radar. And so at the time, it's still an underdeveloped country, but even more so back then.
Hmm.
And we're trekking through these remote villages with most of them without water. They have to go to the well to get the water. The electricity is spotty if they even have it.
Mm.
And yet you would see these people who were very happy, very content, older people my age, your age, children. And so I said to the Sherpa, one of the guides, I said, "Why are these people so happy? They're so poor." And he looked at me literally, and he
Yeah.
looked at me and he said, "Well, they're Buddhist." And I was like, "Well, what's a Buddhist?" Coming from a very traditional Western background. So I got back to Houston and was at the gym on the treadmill talking to my best friend. And I was like, "So I'm looking into this Buddhist thing. And I've been going out to these temples in way West Houston." And for anyone who knows Houston, to get from the center of Houston to West Houston takes like 2 hours with the sun
Right.
blaring in your eye.
Yeah.
And the temples were wonderful, except that they were geared to the Southeast Asian communities. So there were Vietnamese temples, there were Thai temples, and I didn't really have a connection there. So my friend, we're on the treadmill, and my friend is saying, "Well, there's a temple right down the street here, and it's run by the chair of religious studies at Rice University and her husband, who is a PhD in hospice care psychology." And I was like, "Okay, I'm going there." So
Yeah.
I went there and eventually met a great Tibetan master, and he invited me to go to Nepal. And it all really changed my life, Cordelia. And one of the reasons that I didn't want to move back to the United States was because it didn't fit with my values at that point. the money game was, and don't get me wrong, money is important and I need it. But the money game didn't work for me. And bear in mind, this was back in 2003, 2004, 2005 when I moved. So that didn't work for me. The increase of violence didn't work for me. And so I felt every time I would go to the United States, and I think this is important for expats to remember, you may have changed. I changed. But people in your home country, they're in the same spot.
Right.
So I had to realize that I had made a fundamental change in my life and I didn't necessarily fit in the United States like I used to.
Yeah.
So that was the reason why I continue to be an expat. And I think it's really important for current expats and potential expats to realize that most expats go back to their home country. Most expats can't make it work long term. And
Yeah.
it's something to really think about.
It really is. It's one thing that I feel like there's this honeymoon period.
Mhm.
And even though you sort of mentally know you're not on vacation, everything feels like you're in an Airbnb or something like that. Right? And then something, either time passes or something happens, but at some point it hits you that this is your everyday life and it's not a vacation and it's not about, meeting the locals, and it's like your life. This is your life. And everything is foreign. You don't understand, it's one thing to not understand the spoken communications. Even if you learn the language, you can, but you don't even understand. There's so many unspoken communications that are part of our life, and you don't understand any of those. And
Right.
even, so it's a big adjustment. And even though we're staying and I'm really grateful that we're here, there's days when it's so hard, and I get it. I get why people go back, because you just want that. There's like this feeling of comfort that you almost like you just don't get. It's a
Mhm.
different feeling of, you can create it, but it's different. It's totally different. Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
And, I remember when I lived in Korea at the university, there was a colleagues, all university professors, and sometimes when you live in another country, things don't work the way you expect them, or you just
Mhm.
have a hiccup that you thought, "Why?" And so we coined this phrase, IHK, which stood for, "I'm having an IHK day." It's an I hate Korea day. Now, none of us hated Korea. Korea was
Right.
fabulous. I chose not to stay in Korea because they weren't my people. But now, living in Portugal, there are times when I have IHP days.
Yeah.
I hate Portugal, which I don't hate Portugal at
Right.
all. I consider myself incredibly lucky to have landed here. But not everything works the way you think it should work.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just
Yeah.
means it's different. We're in a different culture. And we can't expect things to work the way we think they should work because we're from blah, blah, blah country.
Hmm.
And I think we have to be very careful about offering our opinions. This is a lesson I learned when I was living in Nepal, because I thought, oh, well, I can fix this and I can fix that.
Hmm.
They weren't asking me to fix anything. They were
Right.
happy. And so I think that's a lesson that we have to learn when we live in a foreign country, that there are hiccups. People complain a lot about the bureaucracy here in Portugal. There is bureaucracy in every country. If you're from the United States, there's the IRS. Every country has their bureaucracy. So I think you have to remember that you, I think you always have to remember that you are a guest in your host country. and that things are different. And different does not mean good. It does not mean bad. It just means it's different. And learn to embrace the differences, whether or not you're having an I love Portugal day or an IHP day.
Right. I love that. I think that's great advice. Now, when you decided to get your training in Nepal so that
Mhm.
you could be a legitimate English teacher, not somebody who just put their hand on a rock and said, I can teach English, did you go back to the States for that or did you do that online? How did you get that certification?
I did that certification online. I also did the diploma online. I had to do my practicum in person, but the studies were online. And you can go through Cambridge University for language learning. You can go through Trinity. So I did my certification with Cambridge. I did my diploma through Trinity University, London College, Trinity University, London College. It's been a long time since I thought about that. Um, but I had to do my practicum in person.
So you had to go to England for that?
Actually, no, I went
Okay.
to Borneo for that
Oh,
because
okay.
uh, because at the time they had a contract with the government of Indonesia and with the schools in Indonesia. And so they needed teachers there. So they were doing training there. So I just got lucky and was able to do my training in, and I think this has actually helped me a lot. I was able to do my practical training in a country where the language was not English, as opposed to going to England where the language is English. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, when you moved from South Korea, you said you kind of knew this end date was coming where you were going to be forced to retire. Did you have your new situation lined up before you moved to Portugal, or did you move and then get your new job?
I absolutely had this. I was already an employee of LTI, Language Testing International, when I moved to Portugal. And I'm glad you brought this up because I think it's really important. You should not consider moving to a foreign country without already having these things in place. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, and by the way, it's worth what you're paying for it. Zero. In my opinion, it's a mistake to move to a country and think, oh, I'm going to start blah, 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 and it's going to be a success.
Mhm.
Because if you need that to work, it may not. I mean, you may be lucky and it may work, but you shouldn't count on that. So it's kind of like you don't quit a job until you have another job lined up. Same thing. You don't leave one country unless you know you've got all your ducks in a row for your new host country. It's risky otherwise. And I
Yeah.
sadly see expats who try and start businesses here thinking, "Oh, I've got this great idea and it's going to work." And it fails. So I think you really kind of have to know what you're going to do in advance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really good advice, and especially if your business is new to you. Like, it's one thing if you sort of have a successful business and maybe you're just doing it in a different place.
Right.
People move here and they're like, I'm going to start an art gallery. I'm going to start a restaurant. I'm going to start this. And they need that money to live on. And it's very difficult. It's difficult, really, in general, to start a business when you need the money to live on, even if you're in your own country. Like, that's just a tough spot. Most business advice would be start your business when you have other sources of income so that you're not dependent on that. But
Which
yeah,
is, by the way, which is exactly what I did. I had income from the university. I saw the path that I
right,
was going to be leaving. And so I made sure I had a stream of income before I left my
right.
university position. And you need a business plan like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
Mhm.
do you find that your salary, without obviously getting into details of how much money you make, but your salary are you comfortably able to live on that here?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Okay. Um, so I am not a salaried employee. I am a contract worker.
Okay.
Sometimes there's a lot of work, sometimes there's not as much. I have savings. I had a pension from Korea, and I am now at the age of Social Security.
Okay.
So I don't depend on my savings, and I don't depend on Social Security. I depend on my US income. I can live in Portugal on my US income and dip into my savings. I live more comfortably now that it's not that I do anything differently, but I know I have the fallback of Social Security. So I haven't changed my work habits. I still work as much as I ever did, but now I have that cushion of, okay, well, if anything happens, I've also got Social Security.
Okay.
I could not live in Lisbon.
Mhm.
And when I was looking for a place to buy, it was like, okay, Lisbon out of the question. Now let's
Right.
move that circle a little bit bigger. And I moved it out, I moved it out, I moved it out, looking at different places that I liked and could or could not afford. And am very happy that I've ended up here. For those of you who don't know, I'm in Caldas da Rainha, on the Silver Coast, and it's worked out well for me. Yeah. But everything's going up in price, and I might not eat out as many times as I might have previously. And, you know, I mean, we all watch our pennies. So, yeah, I live
Yeah,
within
I
my
think
budget. I think that's really important. You live
mhm.
within your budget. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think that sometimes there is a perception that, people move here. There's kind of, I don't know, how do I want to say this? There is a perception that if you're living here as a foreigner, that you're a millionaire
Or retired.
or a retired millionaire. Like
Yeah.
you have enough money to live for the rest of your life without ever earning a penny. And there are many of us who are not doing that, who are working. We still need to pay the bills. I have one person who I hired to help fix something, and he said to me, "Well, why don't you just buy a new one?" I was like, "Dude, I'm not a millionaire. I know that he has clients who are millionaires because he's a handyman, right? Or whatever, plumber or handyman. But I'm not one of them. Like we're still working, we're still like making sure we can pay the bills." So I think that that's a really good thing. And if you're going to be in that situation, the things you can do to mitigate your risk, more things you can do, the better.
Yeah. And speaking of mitigating risks, as a contract worker, when I get paid, the first thing I do is take 30% off the top. Lock it away for taxes,
I do the same thing.
both
Um,
federal, no matter where, federal, whether you're in Portugal or the US, and self-employment taxes. So just knock off 30% and lock it away until the tax man cometh every year.
yeah, I actually do 35 just to be safe. And then if we end up with a little extra, it's a cushion. But I learned that lesson the hard way when we lived in the US, and I didn't do that. And we got, it takes one really bad year to learn that lesson the hard way when you owe a tax bill. So
Yeah.
don't do that to yourself. I think that's a really
Yeah.
good lesson.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's a typical workday like for you here?
A good question. My Okay, so first of all, we've already touched on the fact that neither you nor I are retired millionaires. And it's kind of difficult because there are a lot of retirees and they're like, "Well, let's go do this and let's go do that." And you're like, "I got to work."
Mhm.
My work generally, because most of the language learners that are taking this test are actually in Korea and Southeast Asia.
Okay.
My work comes in at two different times on the weekends, which sucks for me. So most of my work is on the weekends, on Saturday and Sunday.
Oh,
And
okay.
I will open my laptop sometime in the morning and work until I can't stand it. And in the mornings, Monday through Friday. I am a bit of a workaholic, to be honest with you. And I also like my work. So usually in the mornings when I wake up after I have coffee and check emails and make sure the world is safe for another day, I'll open my company page and see if there's any work for me. And I'll work for a couple of hours, depending upon what I have to do. I don't let my work interfere with my life Monday through Friday. For example, we're recording this on Thursday. Tomorrow morning is a hike day for me. So I won't work tomorrow at all.
Okay.
Yesterday, I needed to go to IKEA. So a friend and I went to IKEA in the morning. So I don't let Monday through Friday work interfere with life. But on Saturday and Sunday, I'm workaholic.
I think that's important. And I would say this is also something that happens in any country. If you have your own type of business or whatever you do, it's wonderful to be flexible, but that means you still have to find the hours to work. So yes, there are definitely things to do here. There's long lunches and afternoon things and evening things and weekend things and tons of things, but you do have to say no to some stuff if you're going to be working, whether, you can kind of create your schedule or you need to fall in. We frequently have evening and night calls here because we work primarily with the East Coast of the United States and sometimes the West Coast. So if they want to talk to us at 4 in the afternoon, for them, that's going to be 9 or 10 p.m. here and sometimes even later. So similar to the people in the States didn't change their lives just because we moved, they don't change their work hours just because we are in a different time zone. So if there's something we can shift, obviously we do, but sometimes you have to, work at midnight or whatever, whatever your deal is.
And I think it's important to tell your local friends, hey, weekends are not good for me personally. Weekends are not
Right.
good for me. Or in your case, nights aren't really good for me. So that your friends know, okay, she's not being antisocial. She's just working on the
Right.
weekends, or she can't do dinners during Monday through Friday. I think that communication is important. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And everybody's different, right? So we all have different work situations, at least in the immigrant expat community,
Absolutely.
some people are retired, some people are working, some people have kids, some people don't have kids. So there's always like a little challenge to find good times that work for everybody.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you have a pretty good work-life balance in that you kind of set aside your times off and you have your hobbies. And how have you found making friends here?
Good question. I have two strong opinions on this.
Oh, good.
The first strong opinion is integration is a myth.
Yep.
I found this to be true in Nepal. I found it to be true in Korea, and I find it to be true here. It's not that the local community is hostile or doesn't want to be friends with you. It's that they already have their circle of friends.
Mm.
And that circle of friends speaks their native tongue. And speaking a foreign language in conversation is taxing, no matter how fluent you are.
Yep.
Or not. So I think integration is a myth. Now, do I get invited to somebody's house that's a local person occasionally, or out to coffee with a local person, or have a conversation with the guy at Le Hoy Melin whose English is really good? Yeah, these things happen to me. But friendship, it's rare. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's rare. So that's number one. I think integration is a myth. We will always be, as a guest in a home country, we'll always be foreigners.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, as an expat, it is incumbent upon me to find my tribe. Everybody else already has their tribe. So when you come to another country and hope to settle, you have to make the effort to find people. You have to go to every event that you don't want to go to because you might meet somebody that's in your tribe. And that's the only way to do it. If you want to if you want to just sit at a coffee shop and in front of your screen, you're not going to meet people that way. If you want to sit at home and knit, you're not going to meet your tribe that way. So I strongly recommend you join a lot of groups. You may not stay members of all those groups, but join a church, join a temple, take language lessons in person as opposed to online. Do things with other people and find your tribe, because they're not going to come to you. You have to go out and find them. So
also, when you go to those group events, because some people go to group events and they're like, well, I still don't have friends. I'm like, well, you can't, if you talk to somebody at, say there's 20 people at a thing and you have a nice little chat, well, then you have to say, hey, it seems like we connect. Let's have lunch. Let's have coffee. Let's have dinner. And you have to step out of your comfort zone.
Exactly.
And ask, like, it's like dating in a way, like ask people out and then stay in touch with them. You don't want to you never want to be somebody who's only reaching out to people when you need something.
Right.
So you want to be asking people, to do things. And sometimes not everybody's going to like you. Or you're not going to like everybody, so you're going to ask somebody out and you're like, oh, this is kind of, I don't really want to hang out with them again or whatever. So yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just part of life. But yeah, the expat groups are great. And all those community, and I agree with you on being in them and being active and getting out there. And, people come, I see people post all the time, hey, when's the next, meetup for this town? And I'm like, plan one. That's what I did. I plan stuff all the time. And yes, have I planned things that nobody's come to? Yes. Have I planned things that didn't go the way I expected? Yes. But now I have friends. And then when something does go wrong, I have people that I can reach out to when I'm having a rough day. But the first couple months, I didn't do that. I only reached out to people when I was really in a good space because I wanted to I want to be a positive person. So it's just, it does take work to make friends. And I love that you said that. And integration is absolutely a myth, as is another one of my pet peeves. Is, oh, I thought I would just pick up the language.
Sorry.
And that might have happened like 30 years ago.
No, it wouldn't.
If you were living and working, like if you went to a foreign country and you were living and working in that language, you really didn't just pick it up. You just were in it all the time and working at it constantly.
Yeah.
But now it's so easy to stay in your bubble.
Right.
Because, we have our Netflix subscription and we have Zoom and we have all these things where I talked to my college roommate for an hour yesterday and she's in the States. Like I never have to speak Portuguese, almost never, except in really urgent situations. So you have to study the language to learn it.
Yeah, you have to study the language to learn it, and you can't be afraid to try. So, and I say this as a language teacher. When I taught at university in Korea, they would not speak. And I was like, hey, if you speak, I can help you. Because if you make a mistake, I can deal with that. I can help you fix that. But if you don't speak, and it's the same thing here. I have a set phrase and I use it everywhere I go. And I use it with a smile. And my set phrase is scoop. Now falo bem português, mas estou a tentar, which means, sorry, I don't speak Portuguese well. Positive word. I don't say I speak bad Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese well, but I'm trying. And that one phrase
I love
lets them know I respect you enough to try and learn and speak your language and communicate with you. But I'm a learner and I'm not perfect. And they'll almost always say, do you speak English? And I'll say, sí, mas estou a tentar. Yes, I speak English, but I'm trying. One trick that I do, if let's say I'm going to the bakery and I know I want to buy bread and I know I want the bread cut, I will look up how to say that before I go to the bakery. So that when I go to the bakery, I can try and say it every single time I go to the bakery. The bakery ladies know me, and they know I still can't say, cut, please, which is really embarrassing. When I go to the hardware store and I need nails, I look it up before I walk into the store. And so I can try and say it in their language. I think that shows respect. And, I'm trying and they love it. That and a smile opens doors. Yeah.
I think that's great. I'm going to add that because I do say that I don't speak good Portuguese, but I didn't add that thing about I'm trying because that's a really good little thing to add on. I'm definitely going to do that. I actually have a funny story about practicing the thing though. You have to be careful because not everything, like your translator software doesn't always work because it's looking for literal translations. And I went to the hardware store and I was looking for a tape gun.
What did you get?
That's what we call it in America. It's that thing that you hold in your hand and it's a tape gun, right? So I asked for a tape gun. I did a literal translation of tape gun. And that guy looked at me like I was from Mars because they don't call it a gun.
Oh yeah.
Right. It's not called a gun. It's called like a tape dispenser, right? Or something like that. Right. It's like, I don't even, so sometimes, so I think he was like, why would you call it a gun? Like they just, it was pretty funny. So luckily we figured out what I wanted and he helped me find it. But I think that is a good tip and I practice. And that I think also points to your thing about integration. It's one thing to practice, how do I order sliced bread? It's another thing in a casual conversation where somebody could be literally talking about anything. It's very hard to prepare for that.
Yeah.
And so it just takes a lot of practice.
Yeah.
To even be able to have an elementary social conversation, let alone a deep, profound conversation. So I think, socializing in the international community is essential. I totally agree.
As a language teacher, I would sometimes counsel my learners that statistically, it takes 250 hours to go from one level to another level. And usually what happens is you start here and there's a big bump. So you learn a lot of important, frequently used words quickly. And then there's a plateau. And the plateau goes on for a long time. And this is when your brain is absorbing and keeping the language. And it's only till after the plateau happens that you level up some more. And then you plateau. And then you level up some more. It's like climbing Mount Everest. Learning a language doesn't happen overnight. It's a long process. And you have to embrace it. And you have to make mistakes and, just try. That's it.
I love that.
Yeah.
So would you say that you feel comfortable living here now?
Absolutely. Of all the countries now, let me say my heart lives in Nepal. Okay.
Okay.
But I don't want to live in Nepal. It's too hard. But I am so glad that I ended up in Portugal. I'm very happy here. Having come from experiences in other countries, I really don't have anything negative to say. Am I happy about everything? No, but I'm a hell of a lot happier than I would be in other countries.
Yeah.
No place is perfect. No place. This is, for me, pretty close to perfect. I live in a city where I only take my car out when I'm going a distance. I
Mhm.
can walk everywhere in my town, which I like. I have an incredible fruits and vegetable market. I get organic fruits and vegetables. I have good health care that is reasonable. I feel safe. Now, I'm not stupid. I'm not gonna walk at midnight by myself down the streets. I'm smart, um, but I feel very safe here. Do things happen? Yeah, but yeah. So, yeah, I'm very happy that by chance, I ended up here. Yeah.
Awesome. Now, if somebody wanted to get started in teaching English in it, like as a digital nomad or remote worker like you do now, is that something that you can start today, or is that one of those careers where it was great to start 20 years ago, but it's much harder now? What advice would you give?
I'd say you're spot on with that last comment. It was
Okay.
great to start, but it's a pretty saturated market now. And it was saturated before AI.
Right.
Now, you know, I mean, there was a time when every television or studio was hiring people because they needed people to do the subtitles. They don't need
Right.
to do that anymore. There's a flood of language teachers. The company that I work for requires that you work for an educational institution prior to working for them. So
Mhm.
unless you're already a teacher, you can't even get a job
Right.
with them. And that's true with many of the companies now because it's saturated. Yeah.
Okay. Now, do you feel like you have growth opportunities in your career, or you're going to kind of do this until you're retired?
Well, at 67, I really don't have any more ambitions. I'll do this until I just don't want to do it anymore. What I like about my job, I loved teaching because there was this interaction with young people, and they were always the same age. They're university students, so they're always in their early 20s. I kept getting older, but they were always the same. And what I like about doing this particular online work is I'm still hearing what is of interest to people in their 20s, in their 30s, and older, because one of the main clients of this company I work for is Samsung. And if you want to get a promotion in Samsung, you have to speak a level of English. So I hear people of all ages, and it's interesting to hear what they're talking about and
Mhm.
what music they like and what movies they like. And so I'm unlikely to change careers again because this teaching is my second career. I came from fundraising and development. So I'll stick with it until they either say, "Amelie, you're too old to do this," or "You're no longer any good at it." But I'm happy to say my company is happy with me and I'm happy with them.
That's awesome. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
What are some of the challenges that you faced living, working in Portugal that you could maybe share a lesson learned with our viewers?
I'm going to go with, something I'm dealing with now, which has to do a little bit of a very unpopular topic,
Ooh, I love it.
taxes.
Ah, yes.
Yes. So when you are an expat, it's up to you to get the right information because H&R Block's not going to tell you the right information. You have to ask the right questions. I said H&R Block, but anything. You have to know what's up. So because I was doing contract work back in Korea, I found out that I had to pay the US government self-employment tax, or I had to pay it to Korea. The United States has a treaty with most developed countries that says you either pay into the local social security pension system. And if you don't pay into the local social security pension system, you have to pay into the US system.
Okay.
So when I was in Korea, I was paying into the local pension system and found out that I had to get a form from the local pension system that is a US tax form called X country/USA 1. So in Korea, it was K/USA 1. In Portugal, it's P/USA 1. Now, when I was in Korea, I paid into the private pension fund because I worked for a private university. And I was unable to get the K/PSA1 form. So I'm fully expecting to be audited at some point by the US government because I attached the pension form, the private pension form, to my taxes that says, hey, I paid these taxes. Now, whether they will accept it or not, I don't know. Fast forward to Portugal. The first year that you live in Portugal, you do not have to pay self-employment tax to the Social Security Administration in Portugal, Segurança Social. The first year you're exempt, but that means you have to pay in the US. You're not exempt from that. Okay. So you need to tell your accountant, hey, you need to calculate how much I'm supposed to be paying in the US because they're going to figure it out, meaning the IRS is going to figure it out. Okay. So now I am paying Social Security into the Portuguese Segurança Social, and it's tax season. So I went to my Portuguese accountant and I said to him, I need this USA tax form that you need to get for me from Social Security Portugal. And they're like, a USA tax form from Portuguese Social Security? And you're like, yes. So he got information that said, oh, Amelie has paid into the, so, and I was like, yeah, that's really nice, but that's not what I need. I need the PUS. Okay. So he figured out how to do it. He asked for it on my behalf, clearly, a month ago. It's being analyzed. If I don't get that form before April 15th, I have to pay the United States the self-employment tax. Then I'm going to have to file my Portuguese taxes. Then I'm going to have to file an amendment to hopefully get back the money that I paid that didn't have to pay. So my advice is, if you're self-employed and it's your second year in Portugal and you have been paying, as you should be legally, into the Social Security pension in Portugal, you need to get that PUSA1 form at the end of December, beginning of January.
Okay. Also, just so you know, as an expat, you don't have to file taxes till June 15th.
But if you owe money, you have to pay the money by April 15th.
Oh, that's true. That is true.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that is really interesting, and I knew nothing about that, so now I have to figure that one out. But thank you for that intel. And that is one of the challenges that I think we all face here as workers, is that the tax situation is clear as mud, as they say in the South. And so and different people will tell you different things, and so you kind of have to And you can, I mean, we've hired very expensive international accountants to advise us, and it's, you kind of at the end of the day sort of have to figure it out and do what you think is your best practices and hope it works out well. Because like you
Right.
said, sometimes you try to do it right and it doesn't work, and you just kind of have to do your best practices, and everybody's risk tolerance for, you know, kind of what they're willing to do is a little bit different, and everybody's situation is different. But it's definitely confusing, and it's not an apples to apples comparison. It's not like, well, it's just in Portuguese. It's like a totally different system. So yeah.
And for people, and you have to ask the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be able to answer you if you don't ask the right questions, and be very careful about where you get information from. Check your sources. Susie Q might have good intentions. And by the way, check my sources.
Right.
Go to Social Security Administration.gov if you're a US citizen, and plug in P/USA1 and you'll find out. So make sure you have good accountants that are familiar with international tax treaties, both in your country, and have a good tax accountant in your host country.
Mm-hmm.
Because you most likely need both. Most likely need both. Yeah.
Yes. And you need to line those up in advance, because if you're doing it the week before taxes are due, you're going to have a problem.
Big problem. Yeah. Most of the Portuguese tax accountants have already sent out their inquiries. Are you doing your taxes with us this year?
Mm-hmm.
My USA tax accountant sends that out in the beginning of January. Are
Yeah.
you doing your taxes with us this year? So yeah, you got it. You can't wait till the last minute.
Yeah.
And by the way, for those of you who think, oh, but I've always done my taxes on TurboTax and it's never been a problem. TurboTax doesn't necessarily address expat issues.
They do not.
They do not.
Okay. And what are some of your favorite things about living here and working here?
I would say my favorite thing about living here is walking up the street and going to the fruit and vegetable market.
Mm,
I'm a vegetarian and I'm like, oh.
that's awesome.
I like the friendliness that I feel here wherever I go. I like the feeling of security here. I love the roundabouts. I mean, let me tell you, embrace the roundabouts.
Embrace the roundabouts. I feel like such a badass now because I know how to do the roundabouts. But yes, you need to embrace the roundabouts.
Yeah, embrace the roundabouts. Go on YouTube, learn how to do the Portuguese roundabouts. Study. They have like a map. Study that map. Rewind. Study it again. Yes. Embrace the roundabout. They're so much better than red lights. Oh my God. Traffic moves for the most part.
You know? For the most part.
And by the way, I assume I have come to terms with the fact that I'll likely have a fender bender in a roundabout at some point. Okay, you know, and I'll likely trip on one of the uneven, slippery sidewalks one day. Okay, I accept that. If that's the bad, I take it with the immense amount of good. I love the weather here. Some people complain about it. I don't have an issue with the weather. I mean, some days we get rain for days on end, but that happens everywhere you live, you know? So
it's funny because people do complain when we have a rainy stretch, and I'm like, well, we also have great agriculture. Like, I mean, you have to water the crops or they're not going to grow.
Yeah. I drink wine.
On the weather.
Yeah, I drink wine. Portuguese wine is fabulous and incredibly reasonably priced. Incredibly reasonably priced. Cheese.
So good.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being our guest.
Oh, thank you.
If you have a question for Amelie, you can go ahead and put it in the comments and I will pass it along to her. And thank you so much to everybody who watched the show. And yeah, let us know what topics you'd like me to cover next. And thanks again, Amelie.
Thank you so much, Cordelia. It was a pleasure being here. Super enjoyed our chat.
Awesome.
And
Thank
if there are questions, let me know. And
All right.